Yes, there's lots of examples of hope, but we are at a critical stage, which for some significant environmental challenges, we are almost at the point of no return. And unfortunately, these are such Herculean, urgent challenges. They're not fixed with baby steps.
From NCPR, welcome to Northwards. People, ideas, and conversations from and about Northern New York, Vermont, and beyond. I'm Mitch Teich.
Support for the Northwards podcast comes from the J.C. Steiniger and M.E. McDonald Charitable Fund at Adirondack Foundation in support of the Adirondack Foundation, building stronger Adirondack communities.
If you have kids and you have a television set, there will forever be TV shows and people from those TV shows who are locked in your memory. Not the kids' shows you watched, though I will admit that I still do have a half dozen episodes of The Backyardigans memorized from 2 decades ago. But what I'm talking about are the TV shows you watch to keep yourself entertained, or just sane, when you were awake in the wee hours of the morning or just giving your partner a little more sleep when your kid was a baby. For me, I'll always have fond, if weird, memories of those fishing shows they film in Northern Ontario, reruns of the World's Strongest Man competition, and nature shows hosted by Jeff Corwin. I can't remember exactly which ones. He's had a lot over the years on networks ranging from ABC to Animal Planet to Disney, focusing on his work as a conservation biologist in places from Alaska to Central America to currently Florida. But what's characterized all of them are his strengths as a credible scientist, but also as a skilled storyteller. Corwin himself can trace his love for nature back to a fateful day in his own early childhood when he found a snake in his grandparents' yard in Massachusetts. 5 decades later, Corwin still lives close to his hometown, and that's where he joined us from, ahead of a trip to Lake Placid for a weekend event. Jeff Corwin, thank you for making the time.
No worries. I'm delighted to be spending some time with you guys today.
Um, First of all, if Wikipedia is to be believed, and why wouldn't it be happy birthday?
I know, I cannot believe it. My 57th year on this earth is coming.
Yeah, you have a couple years on me, but why don't we use your birthday as a jumping off point if we can? And maybe this is a heavy question to get us started, but you have been in conservation for your entire adult life. Are things better or worse than when you got into this field?
Well, it's sort of a mixed bag. I would say some of the significant challenges we're facing today, these new unprecedented environmental challenges, are pretty catastrophic, and we are far worse. For example, globally, with plastics and with a rapidly changing climate. And we discover that these challenges we face, a warming planet, environmental and habitat loss, species exploitation, all of these things, they don't work independently in a vacuum. They conspire with each other and feed off each other, make things worse, and often have a direct connection to each other. So you destroy a rainforest, that alone is catastrophic. But by destroying that rainforest, you are destroying the natural carbon bank. So you take the solution to climate change and you make it a culprit to climate change. And by destroying that Indonesian rainforest to grow palm oil, which we all use, from lip balms to the white stuff in those chocolate cookies, you are exposing endangered species to the black market wildlife trade. So all of these things are conspiring and impacted by each other. And that's the reality of the world we live in today. This impacts not only the natural world, which we have an aesthetic or cultural connection, but our very own survival is impacted. These storms of the centuries are now multiple storms every year. We're seeing these changes affect agriculture, the living conditions. We just came out of this huge heat wave where all the records were broken and people perished because of that. If you live in Florida, Florida is a big part of my career right now. I have a TV series in Florida. And Florida is like the poster child for everything going wrong with the environment. And it gets to a point today where, for example, you might not feel that connection, but you do feel impacted now because your insurance is gone, because the insurance companies have left Florida, or you can't drink the water, or the fish you ate has pollutants and pesticides, all of these problems. So in a way, we are in this new phase of environmental catastrophe because we are now feeling that heat. The good news is we have many examples throughout the world and certainly in the United States and North America where we have rose to the occasion. We've reversed a cataclysmic course and we've restored an endangered species. We have countless species that were on the brink of extinction not so long ago within our lifetimes because we stepped up and we made those critical decisions to save those species. You know, where you guys are today in the Adirondacks, there's more forest there and cleaner habitat, and rivers and wetland habitat than there were during the industrial period. We have more forests in New England than we did during the colonial period. Yes, there's lots of examples of hope, but we are at a critical stage, which for some significant environmental challenges, we are almost at the point of no return.
But I would think without hope, it would be really hard for you to go to work every day.
Yeah, and I'm very lucky because I live in New England. I live in a little island off of southeastern Massachusetts, right at the top of Cape Cod, and in the summertime I'm a commercial fisherman, so I have my hands in lots of different cookie jars. But yeah, there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of good things, but we have major issues that we can't ignore because we've reached that breaking point. And unfortunately, these are such Herculean, urgent challenges. They're not fixed with baby steps.
What do you get out of commercial fishing that you don't get out of all of the myriad other things that you do?
Well, a lot of that has to do with my family, living on this little island for almost 30 years now. We made a very a deliberate effort to focus in on local resources. I believe an important component to conservation is not having your foods have a big carbon footprint to get to your refrigerator. So we started growing our own foods. We started doing our own honey and chickens and all that. So we created a little farm. And I always believed that you need to have advocates and partnerships and not adversaries. And I believed that commercial fishing, especially regional fishings where we have good regulations and good checks and balances and enforcement in places like Massachusetts, are a part of that because these are legacy fisheries. So, this isn't like a massive fishing boat off Thailand that's just scooping everything up. This is a highly regulated, culturally significant legacy fisheries that has gone from the grandfather to the father to the granddaughter. The boat that your dad had, the lobster boat, is now belonging to the son or the daughter. And I wanted to be a part of that. And especially how new innovations are integrating and new technologies with that old salty cultural component to help ensure that fisheries survive. And I felt I needed to have sweat in that game. And I also love it. I love fishing. And I would say that I'm not the most successful commercial fisherman in the world. We're not breaking the bank from my commercial fishing, but I enjoy that connection and I enjoy that experience.
You find that people are surprised when they hear you do that?
They are surprised, and it takes a while to explain it. But I think that is the American model of conservation. The American model of environmental stewardship is based in the idea that nature, species, habitat are celebrated natural resources that are to be cherished, to be, beloved, to be shared, but also to be sustainably used. And, not everything clearly, but with certain components of nature. In order to have a vibrant, healthy fisheries, you need to have a vibrant, healthy ocean. And if people are able to have success in fishing at a sustainable level, it means we are making the right choices to protect our environment. And we find ourselves in situations during the long game where we know that climate change is now affecting our lobster population. Our cod fisheries has major challenges because the Gulf of Maine is too warm for them to spawn now. You have all these different challenges. Well, our partners to save that are not only the scientists and the environmental conservationists, but also the resource users and business people need to be a part of that story. That's the only way you can truly protect my experience from a lot of field work and around the world long before TV, working in rainforest conservation and working with indigenous communities, that if those communities, if those people are disenfranchised, and if they are not a part of the partnership, where you can have all the money and all the laws and you can create a national park on a map, but it won't be adequately protected until the people that are most connected to that resource are a part of the leadership and partnership to protect that resource. So, for example, you can have all the NGOs and all the laws, and you can have CITES and groups and law enforcement and rangers. But if people that live in communities where there are black rhinos that are being exploited for their horns, if they are disenfranchised and on the verge of collapse, they don't give a flying hoot about a black rhino. So how do you bring them into the partnership? I think that is a big part of how we successfully protect wildlife and wild places, is by being inclusive with everybody.
And I appreciate you use the term flying hoot in this case.
Yeah.
Well, and you raise a really good point. I mean, we have this election coming up this year, and looking around the world, there were just elections in the UK and in France and EU elections as well. But I don't feel like we're hearing much about conservation and environmental issues in the context of national politics these days. Is that something you are sensing as well?
I do sense that. I think we find ourselves in this bit of an existential crisis. And I think we back burner these critical stories, but make no mistake about it, the existential crisis we face has an environmental conservation component to it in every which way it could.
If I could take just a second here to, we mentioned, your birthday, and you said, I think you're turning 57. So that means it's been, what, 51 years since you first picked up a snake on at your grandmother's farm? Is that right? That's the
It
origin
is.
story?
It is kind of, and I've been that snake kid. Still love snakes, and it was interesting. For me, community is so important, and I live in the community where I grew up. This little island is only 3 miles from where my parents live, and my career has gotten to the point where it can be very busy and turbulent and a lot of travel. And I just was a keynote speaker in London for a major environmental event, and I have to travel somewhere else. And then when I come home, I kind of want to just focus on myself and my family and do the joys: scuba diving, fishing, working the garden. And, you kind of feel, I don't want to say selfish, but you feel like, at this point, you've earned that. And, my neighbor reached out to me and she was like, oh, my grandkids are here from California, and my daughters, and they're big fans, and they want to know, they're like, 12, 13, 14 years old, and they want to know if you could take them for a hike in the woods. And I felt like part of me is like, am I too busy for that? And then I was like, well, you have the morning. She's probably going to give you a nice bottle of wine for doing it. And I found it so, it's like, this is why you do what you do. You don't do it just to write a book or to create a TV series that hopefully people will watch and will make good revenue. You also do it because you want to inspire that next generation. And walking with these kids that had a connection to me and then had real questions about the world and this beautiful moment in nature. I'm like, this is just as important. Hang out with these three preteen kids that have a passion for nature. And I got to talk about sassafras and show them a little wild brook trout. And, that is just as important. And yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. I mean, the idea that there is a kid someplace, whether they're out there walking with you or they're in my neighborhood here in northern New York, who's going to pick up a snake or a turtle or whatever, and there's still this moment that they could be hooked, and you are someone who really can point to a single moment in your life where you experienced something and it had this tangible effect on kind of everything that came afterwards.
Absolutely. And it's been an evolution for me. And you constantly want to grow and evolve, especially as the media changes, becomes more competitive, you get a little older, you can't become complacent and you're constantly hustling, getting to the new gig. It's funny, people think like you get to a point and you just stay at that point. You have to constantly work at your craft. And what I do has a component of a craft. The components of telling those stories have changed. Like, for example, social media. I had no interest in social media, but I've learned painfully that has to be a critical part of the. There are people now that just know me through social media. They don't watch TV. Facebook. I have probably 700,000 followers, and some of these people, you know, they're tuning in because of stuff that I've posted and not necessarily from my series in ABC. So, yeah, you have to constantly adapt and grow, or you become stagnant. You become a typewriter, and yeah, it's kind of the challenge.
It's a lot of pressure in what you do when it comes to social media. I mean, it's sort of one thing. I mean, if you were in academia, you'd have a field season where you could spend an entire, 3 months, say, working on something. And TV, you've got a production schedule, but it's at least a little more expansive. But, when you're talking about an Instagram or a Facebook post, you have to catch somebody and get your message across instantaneously.
You do, and you don't have the luxury of yarning a story. I'm a good yarner, and yarning does not work in social media. It's all about a reel. Has to be a story in under a minute. And if you've done well, if you got 3.7 million views, you told that story well. If you got 3,000 views, not so much. And you see that, or you see your viewership grow. You're like, oh my gosh, I got 2,000 more followers. Or you wake up and it's like, where did they go? They're gone. And it's like, oh, did I say something? So it's also, it's interesting. There's this sense of you have to watch every component of how you communicate in social media. And like someone says something you don't like, and you tell them you don't like it. Well, it all of a sudden that opens up a wormhole of people that feel slighted because you didn't like something that they said. And you constantly have to ask yourself at what level, at how level do you take that serious? I've come to realize social media is very, very important. I mean, I've had jobs gained and lost in my career because of social media robustness. And but yet, do you get offended if you say something like, hey guys, I was in Cape Cod today and I found this hognose snake. It's so beautiful. And then the first question you get is, where did you see that hognose snake? And then if you say, I told you, Cape Cod. And then it's like, oh, it's like you open up. So you have to learn to kind of not be thin-skinned with this stuff.
So let's bring things full circle. As you think back on your years of doing the work that you do, is there something that you point to and say, wow, I think I've really made a difference in this area?
There have been a couple of moments, you'll get like an award, like an Emmy award or something like that. And, at that moment, it feels nice. But it's really about people. Every day I'll have someone, because I've had a big story arc of multiple series over multiple years, going back almost 3 decades. I'll meet someone who says, a young woman who's not so young, will say, "Oh, I became a veterinarian because of you," or "I became a scientist, a conservationist because of you." You'll find out these stats like, which I didn't even know. It's not like we tried to do this, but like 80% of the scientists we feature in our shows are women. And I don't know if there's a reason why that we have that demo, but to me, I was like, well, that's pretty cool. I'm showing people the environmental leadership and exploration in this very important part of our society. Things like that, little things like, I had a friend of mine who created this great zoo. She had passed away in Central America. Her name was Shannon Martola. She created the Belize Zoo. And I used to go to that Belize Zoo as a teenager. And I've known her since a teenager. And like I hadn't been there in a while, and I went in the zoo, and then right at the front entrance was a picture of me, a younger me, with a crocodile and telling the story of Jeff Corwin at a zoo. And I was like, man, I had an impact, and I didn't even know about that. And they're using my name to tell this story. And I was so proud of that. But then after we had this conference, and the U.S. ambassador came for this big event, memorial event, this scientist came up to me, and they had named a whole species of snail after me that they discovered in a place where I did my graduate work. And I was so excited. They actually gave me a sample of the snail and the paper that they used to describe it. And then I saw the snail, and the snail in the picture is this beautiful long blue snail, and it's actually about the size of a fingernail flick. But I was humbled by that. I was like, all those things. My mom was reading a book, and it was a book about grief. And it was about this, during my career, mid-level career, I think my first kid, who's a film major here, she's now just turned 21. She's probably just a baby or 2 or 3. And there was this teenage girl who had cystic fibrosis. And through this Make-A-Wish group, she wanted to spend time with me. And we did some time in the field, and I had a little museum that I created, and she had this great experience. And I kept in contact with her over the years. And I didn't think it had an impact. I knew it was important to her, and it was important to me that I got to be a part of that. But my life went on, and then her life didn't. She eventually died very young, 15 or 16. And my mom got this book about grief, and it was written by this very well-known physician. And there was a whole page about how this person had an impact, and it was about me. And to me, that was just as important. Not that it was in a book, but that limited time with that person had that impact.
I have to imagine that the 6 or 7-year-old Jeff Corwin, who was just being exposed to the natural world, would be amazed to learn that someday there would be a snail named after him.
I was humbled by it, but I don't live in that stuff. I think there was a time where, it's like, I haven't had my Today Show fix, or when am I going to get on the Tonight Show again? I have very little interest in that stuff anymore. To me, it's just about continuously being a good storyteller with nature, and to inspire people towards environmental stewardship. As you probably know, as you get older, the ego gets beaten out of you a little bit, and you have other priorities, and those things are less significant than what they were at a different time of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And ego's kind of boring.
Yeah, it doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah.
It just gets inside of you.
Well, Jeff Corwin, as much as not getting the Today Show or the Tonight Show fix doesn't mean that much, I'm glad you're getting your North Country Public Radio fix here for the moment.
No worries.
biologist, conservationist, and TV host Jeff Corwin, speaking with us from his home in Massachusetts. His current TV show is called Wildlife Nation with Jeff Corwin, and he'll give the John C. Bogle Adirondack Roundtable Lecture on Saturday morning at the Cambria Hotel in Lake Placid. You'll find links to more information about him and about the lecture at ncpr.org/northwards. Ethan Shanty is not an endangered species, but he is one of a kind, and he's going to share the names of everyone who helps make this show possible.
Northwards is an NCPR podcast production. The show is written, edited, and produced by Mitch Tyke with digital production supervision by me, Ethan Shanty. Caitlin Kelly handles our social media, Bill Hanel is our digital director, and Doyle Dean is our production manager. Music is by the Wickmore Jazz Trio of Plattsburgh. To support this show and find more podcasts, visit ncpr.org. This is NCPR, North Country Public Radio.